On this Wednesday night, pleased to prioritize kids over politics. The Assembly of First Nations urged to shift focus away from infighting.
We have the highest suicide rates in the world.
And the non-confidence vote on the national chief. Disqualified and defending his name.
We felt we were going to win this leadership.
Patrick Brown's elimination from the Conservative leadership race. Excruciating waits in crowded ERs. Why it's only expected to get worse. And heart-stopping moments high above.
Oh my God, how the did this happen?
The dangling construction worker with nowhere to go but down.
Ah!
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Colleen Christie.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. It is the second day of meetings for the Assembly of First Nations, with hundreds of chiefs and representatives from across the country gathered in Vancouver. And today the focus is starting to shift away from the group's internal politics to the critical issue of child welfare and the AFN's recent settlement with the federal government. Neetu Garcha has tonight's top story.
Emergency Draft Resolution Number 3, Special Business Suspension to the National Chief, has been defeated.
With 26 in support and 252 opposed to continuing the temporary suspension of the Assembly of First Nations National Chief, she says the numbers speak for themselves.
The resolution spoke to it, said, yeah, we want to hear the truth. We want to know what's going on. And we're not going to allow anybody to silence you anymore. We really have to work on the healing and repairing those relationships within the AFN executive. And we're going to look to our elders and our knowledge keepers to help us walk through that.
But for some of the youngest representatives in the room, like AFN Youth Council's Rosalie Labilwa, all this is drama created by poor leadership, allowing politics to get in the way of what really matters: Indigenous children who've been separated from their families.
Every time you decide to squabble amongst yourselves, you forget the children and the young people that you once swore to protect. And if you want to gauge the outcomes of your leadership, then you should look to our children. And we have the highest suicide rates in the world, especially within our northern communities.
Also addressing the Assembly, Cindy Woodhouse, a lead negotiator in the recent $20 billion settlement to compensate First Nations children and families discriminated against under federal programs and policies.
Efforts made to avoid the mistakes of previous compensation processes reflected in the final settlement agreement. Like for example, we pushed for a trauma-informed claims process that reduces the need for invasive and triggering questions.
Members later hearing from advocates who were removed from their homes as kids. Ashley Bach says she was apprehended from her mother and placed with a white family the day she was born in Vancouver.
These shortcomings have really eaten away at me for the past year and a half since they were realized, and I want to be clear that the pursuit of justice, compensation, and other remedies isn't over yet.
Neetu, what's the latest on calls for a forensic audit into the AFN?
Well, Colleen, there had been a lot of back and forth around the two remaining emergency resolutions, one to oust the national chief through a non-confidence vote, which has just officially been removed, and the other to begin a forensic audit and an internal investigation of the AFN has just gone into the debate period and has yet to go into a vote. Colleen?
Neetu Garcha in Vancouver, thanks so much. He was seen as one of the frontrunners, but Patrick Brown has now been disqualified from the Conservative Party's leadership race. The party says he was kicked out due to an alleged breach of financing rules in the Canada Elections Act. As Abigail Bimman explains, Brown is fighting back.
It's impossible to respond to a phantom allegation.
Patrick Brown says he never got enough details about allegations against him. He's placing the blame squarely on his biggest leadership rival.
We're calling this out for what it is. This is Pierre Poilievre's campaign not wanting a fair election. They want a coronation.
The Poilievre campaign says they have nothing to do with it, while the party says Brown was given numerous and generous opportunities to defend himself, but won't go into specifics.
There have been a series of complaints and allegations that have come forward. Some of them more serious than others. Some of them dealt with transgressions or alleged transgressions of the rules of the race.
A source close to the leadership committee tells Global News some allegations involved numbered companies in Brampton paying Brown campaign staff, violating the Elections Act. We asked him about that.
You have more details than we do by virtue of you posing that question. They didn't even tell us where the business was located. And so it's impossible to respond when you don't have any details.
Brown says he has 1,800 volunteers.
Disqualifying a near top of ballot candidate, that doesn't come lightly. But I think it would be incumbent on everyone in this situation to maybe detail what they knew a little bit more.
The leadership race is in its home stretch, and while a candidate dropping out tends to benefit the front-runner, Pierre Poilievre, especially if a number of Brown voters choose not to vote at all, it could also help other candidates trying to pick up some of those votes.
Obviously creates opportunity for someone like Charest. It creates a different kind of opportunity for someone like Poilievre, and it creates a mess for Patrick Brown, to the extent that this sticks to him in any way.
For now, Brown says he's weighing legal options and looking at an appeal. He says it's too early to talk about next steps, including another possible mayoral run in Brampton. Meanwhile, the party says first ballots are already in the mail and it's too late to take Brown's name off. They're looking at how to deal with that. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
Overseas, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson remains defiant despite growing calls for his resignation as more of his ministers and staff quit.
Frankly, Mr. Speaker, the job of a Prime Minister in difficult circumstances when he's been handed a colossal mandate is to keep going, and that's what I'm going to do.
More than 40 ministers and aides have resigned in the past day as Johnson faces backlash over his handling of sexual misconduct claims against a former member of his government. Europe Bureau Chief Crystal Goomansingh has more on the tumultuous day at 10 Downing Street.
It's playing out like a viral meme of how it started.
It is wonderful to see this new team assembled here.
Versus how it's going.
I've apologised and I continue to apologise. I once again offer a full apology. Sorry for the mistake I made.
I do fear that the reset button can only work so many times.
The former health secretary and once fierce defender of the British Prime Minister likened to being on Boris Johnson's team to walking a tightrope between loyalty and integrity.
And at some point, we have to conclude that enough is enough. I believe that point is now.
Sajid Javid is one of dozens involved in a Tory revolt just weeks after many of the same MPs rallied around Johnson, ensuring he survived a vote of non-confidence. It appears the Prime Minister's flip-flop on what he knew about sexual misconduct claims involving the man he named Deputy Chief Whip was one scandal too many for his team.
Mr. Speaker, isn't this the first recorded case of the sinking ships fleeing the rats?
It's all over, Prime Minister.
Amid this storm, Johnson is working to keep his cool.
Prime Minister, how's your week going?
Terrific. Like many others.
This day really isn't like any other. Johnson has made history for the most ministers resigning in a single day. He's also the only British Prime Minister to be fined while sitting in office for breaking his own COVID lockdown rules. But, Colleen, we do have to remember he's called Teflon Boris for a reason.
Indeed, Crystal Goomansingh in London. Thanks, Crystal. In the U.S., authorities say the man charged with killing 7 people at a 4th of July parade in Illinois has confessed to the shooting and was planning to carry out a second attack. Jackson Prosco has the latest on the investigation, plus the tragic stories of the victims and some of the survivors.
Monday's attack shattered lives and broke families. Kevin and Irina McCarthy were both killed as they watched the Independence Day parade. Their 2-year-old son, Aiden, was found by strangers, wandering alone, covered in blood.
He was saying, "Mommy, Daddy," so I went back up to look for his mom and dad, and then I saw the scene. Carnage.
Aiden is now an orphan. A GoFundMe for his relatives has raised more than $2 million and counting. The difficult question of why this happened remains unanswered and perhaps unknowable. The suspected gunman, 21-year-old Robert Cremo III, made his first court appearance Wednesday after admitting to police that he opened fire on the crowd.
He went into details about what he had done. He admitted to what he had done.
A motive still isn't known. Police say in addition to disturbing online posts, the suspect had an affinity for the numbers 7 and 4, matching the date of the massacre. They also believe he came close to staging a second attack after leaving the scene of the first.
While he was driving and he located this celebration occurring in the Madison area, he contemplated another attack with the firearm he had in his car.
Despite warnings about his mental health and previous calls to police, Cremo was still able to legally arm himself with assault rifles. His father sponsored his application for the necessary firearms permit.
The state of Illinois and the United States should ban these types of assault weapons.
Instead, the U.S. seems doomed to suffer more of these types of avoidable tragedies. Police in Richmond, Virginia revealed that they disrupted a plot to attack that city's 4th of July celebrations. They've arrested 2 men who had high-powered rifles and hundreds of rounds of ammunition. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Healthcare staff sound the alarm. Coming up, fears emergency wards could get pushed further to the brink. More than 13 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine are going to be thrown out. Canada signed a contract with AstraZeneca in 2020 to get 20 million doses of its vaccine, and 2.3 million Canadians received at least one dose. But in the spring of 2021, concerns about rare but potentially fatal blood clots and the increased availability of other vaccines limited the use of AZ. Last summer, the federal government promised to donate the remaining supply to other countries, but only sent about 4 million doses overseas. Right across the country, hospital emergency rooms are struggling to keep up with demand. That includes urgent care needed for the youngest patients. COVID-19 cases and viral illnesses typically seen in the fall and winter are climbing. And as Jamie Morocker explains, pediatricians are worried about the impact on an already strained healthcare system.
That chronic cough pushed Caitlin Lavender to take her 2-year-old daughter Everly to the emergency room in Pembroke, Ontario. There, she says, they waited 10 hours to see a doctor.
Our family doctors actually, we can't go in and see him at all. And getting a hold of him is quite hard sometimes. He just tells us to go to the hospital. I'm like, but I'd rather just come to him.
Because of COVID, many general practitioners aren't seeing patients in person. In turn, families are relying on urgent care. At Sick Kids in Toronto, the emergency room is overcrowded, up 20% since pre-pandemic levels.
What we're struggling with is the amount of patients seeking care for primary care, not emergency care, who are coming to our emergency department.
At the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ottawa, it's contributed to record admissions in May and June. Then added staff shortages, vacations, and sick calls.
Kids are waiting longer than anybody, than adults, than anywhere in the health systems.
At this Winnipeg hospital, one mother says her 15-year-old daughter waited 20 hours for treatment and is now in the ICU.
I'm livid. I'm absolutely livid. The healthcare system has completely failed my child.
And there's concern COVID's newest mutations will make the situation worse. New data analysis shows Omicron infected 17 million Canadians in just 5 months. That's around 100,000 infections a day. BA4 and 5 are said to be even more transmissible. Meanwhile, Canada's youngest are still waiting on an approved COVID vaccine, something Health Canada hopes to push forward by the end of the month.
Emergency rooms across the country is really kind of the coming together of a perfect storm, from outside illnesses to how the individual healthcare worker themselves is burnt out.
As a result, ERs across Canada closed their doors or decreased hours over the long weekend. With fall, cold and flu season approaching, doctors say waits will only increase and access to care will decline. Jamie Morocker, Global News, Toronto.
The World Health Organization is reporting the global number of COVID-19 infections is up for a 4th straight week, including in parts of China, where it's fighting outbreaks after finally easing restrictions. COVID-19 testing is mandatory for residents in parts of Shanghai and Beijing after new cases popped up in the 2 cities. Other regions are facing at least a week of strict closures. Restaurants are limited to takeout only, and attractions like karaoke lounges and casinos have been closed. The streets of Mecca are once again filling up with Muslim pilgrims as Saudi Arabia welcomes international visitors for the Hajj pilgrimage for the first time since the beginning of the pandemic. More than 1 million people are expected to take part in the 5-day ritual, a big jump from the 60,000 who attended last year, but still significantly fewer than the 2.5 million in 2019. In the 133 days since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the United Nations Refugee Agency says 9 million people have fled the country. Those numbers are expected to grow. The governor of Donetsk is calling on the region's 350,000 remaining residents to leave as Russian forces continue to take aim at markets, homes, and other civilian targets. Southwest of there, video from local emergency services shows the situation in Mykolaiv, where the city's mayor says a residential area was hit by rockets late Tuesday. Worldwide, the number of people dealing with hunger on a daily basis is climbing rapidly. A new United Nations report found in 2021, more than 820 million people were living with food insecurity and frequent nutrition deficits. That's an increase of about 150 million people since the outbreak of the pandemic. The report warns the situation will only get worse due to the ongoing supply chain challenges and the war in Ukraine, a country which previously produced a huge amount of grain for export. Blowing the whistle ahead, why some former group home workers claim children's lives were put at risk. In May, with no public announcement, child welfare company Connor Homes surrendered its license to operate foster care homes. While the Ontario government says Connor Homes is unfit to run foster care homes, the company is still allowed to operate group homes. Our team at Global News, in partnership with APTN, has also been looking into Connor Homes. Our Carolyn Jarvis joins us now from Toronto. Carolyn.
Colleen, while we were investigating, Connor Homes management sent this email to staff saying no one can make public statements to the media, not now or ever. But the former workers you're about to hear from are blowing the whistle, saying some kids are being put in danger.
It's awful. It's just money focused. If they cared about the kids, you never saw it.
They should be shut down.
We have agreed to hide the identities of these former Connor Homes workers because of the risk of reprisal. Still, they insisted their message be heard.
I just felt like I was creating monsters out of the kids.
For 46 years, Connor Homes operated foster care and group homes, and it still runs 3 group homes in Eastern Ontario, a for-profit business funded in part by taxpayer dollars.
I feel like they just cared about the money and not the kids.
Former workers say making money meant cutting costs.
One of the youth was going to school, and Connor Homes put their schoolwork in a grocery bag, as if the kid needs any other type of sign that they're a group home kid.
Workers say Christmas gifts were mostly clothing instead of toys because budgets were too tight to afford both.
The youth were lower than anybody, and management had this power trip.
The imbalance of power was seen in many ways, say workers, including the unjustified use of physical restraints, a practice the government only allows if a child is at imminent risk of hurting themselves or others. Were they telling you to restrain when there was no imminent risk?
That's correct. We were told to restrain them if they break a plate.
According to the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services, breaking the rules isn't a new thing for Connor Homes. In 2017, a fire at one of its homes killed a youth and a worker. 2 separate investigations found issues at the home, including a window made of plexiglass blocking an escape route. Though Connor Homes was found not to have violated the fire code, 4 years later at a different home, ministry inspectors reported plexiglass was being used again, asking, is the fire marshal aware?
They would just put that there as a quick fix to make sure they didn't have to pay for a new window.
Inspectors noted the plexiglass issue was addressed. Passing an inspection was critical to having Connor's license renewed, and in secretly recorded audio from September 2020, a manager is heard preparing staff for a ministry visit.
What is a level 2 serious occurrence? Everybody has questions about this.
Workers who say they were put on the job with as little as 3 hours of training and an orientation didn't have the answers to basic questions.
When you're reporting a serious occurrence, what do you say to the on-call manager?
I don't know. I've never reported one, honestly.
Connor Homes declined an interview, but but said in a statement workers receive regular training, and the company strives to exceed the legislated minimum regulatory standards. And yet, former workers say the kids who live there were worse off when they left.
Most are still in trouble with the law or drugs. They just go down bad paths because nobody cared about them. So why should they care about themselves?
Carolyn Jarvis, Global News.
And we continue our investigation into Connor Homes tomorrow night with a deep dive into the company's finances, asking are taxpayers' dollars reaching kids in need? Hanging on to dear life. Next, the terrifying chaos for a construction worker that's caught on camera. Clearly, something went terribly wrong. A construction worker found himself dangling from a construction crane in Toronto, high off the ground. As Mike Drolet reports, the whole ordeal was captured on camera. And before we show you this video, you should know the man is okay.
Oh my God, hang on! Just let your heart out fall, bro!
It's unclear how high the man was up in the air, but if you look closely and listen, it takes 3 seconds for his hard hat to hit the ground. The man was clearly terrified. Yet as the video began circulating online, Torontonians weren't exactly sure how to react. Was it an accident, a stunt, a scene from a movie? It sure seemed real.
Oh my God, how the did this happen?
But remember Crane Girl? 5 years ago, a young woman climbed up on a crane to snap some selfies before needing rescue crews to help her get down. This, it soon became apparent, was not that.
Stop!
The construction company reports the man got entangled with a tagline after hooking a load, and the crane operator failed to notice. Fortunately, he was safely lowered to the work surface and not seriously injured. The incident is under investigation, the company said in a statement. The Ministry of Labour said the worker did suffer injuries, reportedly a broken wrist as he hung on for his life. A few minutes of abject terror, confusion, and in the end, relief. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Holy smoke. And that is Global National for this Wednesday night. I'm Colleen Christie. Tonight's Your Canada is Kenora, Ontario. We love to see your Canada. Please email your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you back here tomorrow. Good night.